tools to remake America. What are the tools that they've used? And he's mentioned two, and we're about to start the third. The first one was media, and the second one was education. Okay? Sometimes it's good to pull back and get the overall outline to figure out, see where we're at. So the tools that they've used to remake America, they've used media and they've used education. We know that they've used them very effectively. And now we're about ready to dive into the third, I believe, which is environmentalism. Okay, Rusty, let's roll it. How's it going? What do you got going? Trying to find the spot. We may have a little bit of a repeat because we don't have the exact spot where we were at, but that's okay.
To dethrone God by erasing the morality in a society and destroying his institutions, the family and the church.
Devalue God and elevate.
Billy Graham. No, they must destroy the Bible's influence in America.
We saw the concentration camps in Nazi Germany, and all the ideologies that elevate man end up devaluing certain human beings.
Dictators of the left, who have believed in the God of the Bible and that our rights are a gift from him to everyone, have always stood up for the preciousness.
Skip ahead some more, Rusty.
Because facts aren't effective.
Man in the whole area of public education.
Keep going.
Very man who did everything in his power, longer if they attend college.
The self-sufficient
There is an absolute right and an absolute
agenda, starting with abortion.
For it 100%. They've had a tremendous effect on public education. It's not positive.
We also see immorality.
That's good right there. That's good there.
I think one of the main problems we face is parents naively thinking that the schools are the same today as they were when they were young. They don't realize there is a battle going on in this country for the hearts and minds of our children.
The game is between 15 and 25 years of age. That's the whole game. If you're over 25, the chances are they're going to put a few pennies towards you to corrupt you. But their game right now is to corrupt the 15 to 25-year-olds or less.
Oh,
and
skip-
right now they're
skip
down in
ahead
first
another
grade
5
with
minutes,
Heather has two
Rusty.
mommies.
Marxist ideas of yesteryear are that has ever existed, the less chance we have of ever turning our people back from.
I pledge allegiance to the world, to care for
back
earth,
back it up
sea,
just a
and
hair.
Differences between the way things are done and the way it should be done.
So when they're teaching social justice in the schools, they're not talking about free enterprise and capitalism and individual self-responsibility, all the things that made America great. They're talking about the things that made Europe and the Soviet Union and China so bad.
The longer we allow our schools to teach the children that America has so many faults, it's not worth saving, instead of the fact that even with its faults, it is the greatest country that has ever existed, the less chance we have of ever turning our people back from the dead-end road we're currently on. A road that promises to give us a perfect world if we'll only give up our sovereignty and our freedom.
you're going to find more and more of the following. This is now called a world pledge. We no longer want the Pledge of Allegiance.
He wouldn't have the intellect or character to take care.
If you can persuade people that government should be in control of the distribution and use of energy, you can persuade them, or rather, you have persuaded them of the necessary and sufficient condition for government control of the most intimate aspects of our lives.
One of the main thrusts of socialism these days is obviously through the environmental movement.
You know, one hates to pick on Al Gore too quickly and easily, but I read the whole of his book, Earth in the Balance, Ecology and the Human Spirit, back in 1992 when it was first published. And if you know anything about the history of political philosophy, you read the last chapter in that called A Global Marshall Plan, and you understand that there is no way to implement what Al Gore was calling for in 1992 in that book, except by means of totalitarian world government.
Patrick Moore, who was a co-founder of Greenpeace, and he was a very dedicated environmentalist, quit Greenpeace when he realized that it had been captured by radical leftists who were intent on using the environmental movement as a vehicle to destroy capitalism.
How many factories work when there's a power outage? None. You want to hurt business, you want to drive down industrial production, you just drive up the prices of energy, you just diminish its availability, and the easiest way to do that is to make people scared to death of the cheapest forms of energy, which are fossil fuels, oil, coal, natural gas, and nuclear energy. They had already made people afraid of nuclear because of irrational fears of nuclear reactor meltdowns, which were physically impossible anyway. But then they had to figure out a way to make them afraid of fossil fuels. Well, the way to do that was to say they're going to cause catastrophic global warming.
So I used to think this was just one great big distraction. If they want to put their energies toward the environment, but now I see that this is now being turned around and used as a tool to further a socialist agenda.
Charles Rubin, a political scientist who wrote the book The Green Crusade, has told this story extremely well. Environment comes from a French word meaning surroundings. Well, now, what is surroundings? Everything around you, right? And so, as Rubin points out, environmentalism is literally everythingism. And so, if you were a socialist committed ideologically to the notion of government having control of everything about our lives, and you saw that you were losing the contest in terms of the creation of wealth and its distribution to capitalism, you had to find some other basis on which to promote your vision of government and to pursue its implementation. Environmentalism, or everythingism, was the perfect card.
In December of 2009, when the ClimateGate scandal broke open and it became public that even the leaders of the movement knew the whole global warming idea was a farce, it wasn't them just having bad data, we as Americans knew once and for all that this movement was simply part of their agenda. It's my guess that regardless of the evidence that comes out against them, they will not let this tool they have waited the last 100 years for go to waste. A tool that gives them the absolute power and control they want, but allows them to get it under the guise of saving the planet.
Stop just for a second. Make sure you got so we're up to speed. So environmentalism, this is one of the tools that they are using to remake America. They used media, education, environmentalism. If you can persuade people that government should be in control of the what? Distribution and use of energy. Control. It's all about control. You can persuade them, or rather you have persuaded them, of the necessary and sufficient condition for government control of the most intimate aspects of our lives. Would anybody here like to go without electricity for a week? No. We've come to absolutely depend upon it. Well, guess what? We have to depend on a whole series of people way outside of ourselves. In the old days, people were self-sufficient and they could survive if they didn't have to depend on the government or some other agency every day that they lived. Well, now we've become 100% dependent. We couldn't think of living. In fact, most of what we do nowadays, where our banking and everything else is all dependent on it. And so it puts us in a situation that makes it easy for a totalitarian government to control everyone. And it takes no time at all, and we're saying, yes, sir, we have no choice. All right? And so this guy actually read Al Gore's book cover to cover. Anybody here want to do something like that, where you read something that you know is politically motivated and it's contrary to truth, and you read it cover to cover? And he says, if you know anything about the history of political philosophy, you read the last chapter called A Global Marshall Plan, you understand that there's no way to implement what he was calling for in 1992 except by means of what? Totalitarian world government. So that's exactly what we've come to. And then, of course, you've heard of Patrick Moore, the co-founder of Greenpeace, that's bailed from it and wants nothing to do with Greenpeace anymore. I hadn't realized that his reason was because he came to recognize that it's been taken over for the purpose of advancing socialism. And he, he's an environmentalist, but not for the purpose of advancing socialism. And so he said, no, I want nothing to do with it. How many factories work when there's a power shortage? The answer is none. So if you want to hurt business, you want to drive down industrial production, you just drive up the prices of energy. And you just diminish its availability. The easiest way to do that is to make people scared to death of the cheapest forms of energy, which are fossil fuels, oil, coal, and natural gas, and nuclear energy. So I just saw an article this week about some scientists that discovered on some island evidence that sea levels in the past were 50 feet higher than they are now. And they say that the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere was as high as it is now. So that shows what's going to happen to us. 50 feet higher. Wait a minute. They're telling us that the glaciers up north have already melted off. Greenland's green again. Well, if that's the case and the glaciers have already melted, how come the oceans haven't risen 50 feet? Because it's baloney. Of course there's signs of water 50 feet higher on these islands. There was a flood. The Bible tells us there was a flood. So yes, of course the water was covering the earth at one time in the past. So what they do is they look at the evidence and they reinterpret it according to their non-biblical worldview. They start by rejecting what the Bible says of the history of the world and form their own thoughts. And they're doing it and using it to advance a socialist agenda. All right. December 2009, when ClimateGate scandal broke open. And by the way, when you look at an article comes down on the internet about global warming, and then you look at the blogs underneath, what's the percentage of people that buy it? Huh? No, there are some. There are some that are diehard supporters of it, but percentage-wise, huh? Yeah, I think there's an awful lot of rank and file people in America that are saying this is baloney. This is baloney. Climate alters, it changes, but it's not a one-way thing. The one I always smiled at, and I don't have the article, but was down in Antarctica when some ice melted off, and they went down underneath and they found tropical fossils on the seafloor. Well, if you have tropical life fossils underneath the ice that's melted off, that tells us that in the past the oceans were warmer. So again, there's a lot of baloney in there. Okay? Any other observations, something that you've seen or heard that jumps off the page for you? Yes.
Makes me really wonder is that in all the environmental talk from that side, they never ever mention something as simple as, and what is really causing a lot of it, is the deforestation of the world.
Okay.
And especially right now, I mean, when I thought of Brazil with the huge fire that's going on right there, I just looked at that and well, there goes the CO2 level. Okay, well, the environmentalists are going to blame that on our fuel consumption. And they're not going to say a word about the lack of the oxygen being produced by...
No, actually they do. That's part of what the...
I've never heard them speak
Macron,
directly to deforestation.
No, Macron was just saying in France, he was all upset at Brazil for burning up our house. Yeah, that's been in the news this last week, actually. Yeah, kind of interesting. So they do. But here's another one for you. How many of us are being told to conserve water to rip out our lawn? Well, a lawn consumes carbon dioxide and produces oxygen. So, I mean, the point is that man is not nearly as powerful as we'd like to imagine that we are. And anyway, it's interesting. Okay, any other thoughts before we jump on to the next? Okay, Russ. Oh, yeah, Aaron?
Wiped out all the fires. I mean, all of the forests.
How did they pitch it?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
We were up in Seattle when all of these fires were happening in California and wasted hundreds and hundreds of acres. How did they pitch this?
Oh, how did they pitch? How come they let it happen?
No, whose fault was it?
PG&E. But that's only one side of the equation, of course. That's one interpretation. Of course, the other side of it is they're trying to be natural, so they leave all the dead stuff on the forest floor to make easy fuel so that it will burn. It makes no sense at all. Yeah. Sure. Well, yes. PG&E's fault because they caused a spark, but the spark wouldn't have done anything if there wasn't fuel just waiting to be burned. And the fuel waiting to be burned is a result of state government policies that say, no, you can't clear the forest floor. You got to leave it there for fuel. So on one hand, and by the way, PG&E's hands have been tied by government regulations. So because they're not allowed to clear it even under their high power lines. Electricity has got the potential of sparks, right? No, you can't clear that. We want it natural. So you leave it natural, and so, yep, forest fires happen. So are they stripping it clean? So they... Underneath the power lines, they're stripping it. How interesting. That's interesting to know. I didn't know that. So, well, at some point, people got to use a little common sense, and common sense ain't all that common. Okay, Rusty, let's go to the next section.
He was born of left-wing parents. He was mentored as a young man by a Communist Party member called Frank Marshall Davis. Now, Davis joined the Communist Party in Chicago, and he was very well connected there. So young Obama eventually wound up in Chicago, and he started working with the very same people that had been working with his friend Frank Marshall Davis.
All of his associations have been with people that are way left of center, hardcore left.
And he's doing nothing more than what is predictable based upon that background.
The nicest word for his agenda is the socialist agenda, and we could go on down the line of the other descriptors of the types of an economy and a society that he's building.
He's all the things that Gramsci wanted to use for social change. Yeah, he's the epitome of the movement.
If you think there's no way that so few could be so effective, consider this. When the Communist Party USA split in 1992, the group that formed was the Committees of Correspondence, and it was their meeting I attended that summer at Berkeley. As I started researching that group, I saw that many of the same people who started or have worked with the Committees of Correspondence and its sister organizations were the same people who were involved with President Obama's campaign and administration. I found file after file on Trevor Loudon's website documenting with footnotes and photographs these connections. The radical left has been so successful, they have persuaded the American people to put one of their own in the White House.
Socialism and Marxism go together like Mary and Mary's little lamb.
The general populace knows very little about what the socialists are up to.
If you're going to find socialism, you're going to find the hardcore communists right behind it.
One of the main avenues has been through what they call the Congressional Progressive Caucus. 20% of the US Congress are members of this organization. They have chairmanships of most of the major House committees and are easily the single most powerful bloc in the US Congress. And virtually all of them are tied to either Democratic Socialists of America, the Communist Party USA, or other radical organizations.
We're literally at this very time watching what's transpiring and has been going on from the Fabian socialist point of view from 1883 to the present. So these guys don't give up.
And they're going at a breakneck speed because they know they've got an opportunity now to change America in a way that can never be changed back. And they're going for broke.
The Bolsheviks, they're just waiting in the woods and they're just smiling like you can't believe. You just read the Communist Party USA blog and they just can't believe their good fortune. Every time they turn around, they just can't believe this is happening. They're like me. I'm a Christian conservative and I can't believe they've been so successful in doing this.
The left has started multitudes of foundations and nonprofit organizations, many of which are using our tax dollars to grind America down.
They use all kinds of patriotic words to masquerade an extreme leftist orientation, which, if anything, would enslave the people in the same kinds of things with the same kind of ultimate results as communism had.
The communists will let the socialists go so far, and then ultimately the communists really turn on their fellow socialists and they wipe them out too. And their attitude, I think, is really probably pretty close. They figure, look, if these socialists betrayed their own country, the chances are once we get in power, they'll betray us too. So they'll figure, let's just rub them out right now. And at a given point, you'll see in the history of communism that they've been very effective in rubbing out their fellow socialists who brought about their socialism before the Bolsheviks and the hardcore communists with a capital C took them over.
One thing we do really have to recognize is this is a domestic enemy. This is not just people with different ideas. These are not just nice folks who have funny, silly ideas that they will eventually figure out are just not very mature. No, these people are dangerous, dangerous enemies, and they are intent on overthrowing this country and imposing the socialist system that will mean extreme hardship for the vast majority of people in this country.
That's true with them constantly seeking to re-engineer society so they reach this level of utopian perfection. Where we, on the other side, we advance the idea that this is about the cause of freedom, and if it hadn't been for Jesus Christ, there never would have been a United States of America, because the inspiration for freedom drove our founding fathers. They were informed by their faith, and I believe guided by the hand of God.
No.
No.
Perhaps treacherously close.
It is never over until it's over. When the fat lady sings, isn't that the slogan? And when the fat lady sings, it's over. Now, she might be clearing her throat.
We saw the great country of Germany in the 1920s brought to its knees. Hitler came into power and destroyed the country. We see countries like Zimbabwe in Africa, which was once a prosperous breadbasket, now just wrecked. Argentina was destroyed by the socialist Perón in the 50s. It was one of the richest countries in the world. So, no, we're not at the point of no return, but it's getting pretty late in the day. There's no time to be casual, that's for sure.
We've spent too many years thinking because we have Republicans in office or the stock market is doing well that everything's okay. This is why the left has gained so much ground. It doesn't matter who's been in office. They've just continued pushing forward with their agenda. Well, I believe this is our last chance to push back.
Okay, let's just stop and recap this just a bit. So have they been successful? And then they begin by discussing Barack Obama. Now, so many people in America, including many people in black churches, have looked at Barack Obama as being, hey, he's the first black president, so he's got to be good. Not understanding that what the socialists have done is they looked at it and realized if we can get a black person to be elected president because he's black, but he's really a socialist, we're going to win. And sadly, huge numbers of American people, and there's a lot of white people who felt like we needed to support President Obama because we have this token guilt for slavery. And because of our guilt over slavery and racism, therefore we'll support this black man who's a very dignified guy, he's intelligent and so forth, not realizing that his policies are completely socialist. Now, I want to ask you the question, and they talk about the Congressional Progressive Caucus. 20% of the U.S. Congress members are members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. It's totally socialist, totally leftist. My question is, what percentage of people under the age of 25 understand what we're talking about here? And who bears the responsibility for this? We can throw it on our public education, but ultimately the responsibility falls on whom? It falls on us. It falls on their parents, and it falls on us, because if we fail to educate the younger generation of what's going on, and sadly, in many ways it seems like the younger generation has more trust and confidence in their teachers at school than they do in the relationship with their parents. How'd that happen? Huh? How'd we get to that point? Well, you know what I think part of it happened? Where we stopped sitting down around a family table and having a meal together. If we abandon the basic structure of the home and the basic things of Christianity in the home, because sadly, I think many children, if we don't sit down around the table and talk face to face like human beings and have meaningful conversations around the table, it's highly unlikely we will in any other context either. And in fact, that's what we're hearing, statistics from young people who have problems in school, and they say, well, when's the last time you had a meaningful conversation with your parents? It's like never. Doesn't happen. Huh? Yes, I agree. But ultimately, it boils down to us teaching our children for them to teach their children. Because the breakdown, if the breakdown is the problem of the parents, then the breakdown happened between us and those parents. Because we're the parents of the parents, for the most part, right? And so we have got to fight to go back to regaining the trust of our own children. And if we don't, it's, I like the statement he says down here in the bottom of this second page of our, one thing we really do have to recognize is this is a domestic enemy. These people are dangerous, dangerous enemies, and they are intent on overthrowing this country and imposing the socialist system. Okay? So this is really a dangerous thing. And then, is it too late? Well, no, but... And then they point out, Germany. Germany was a powerful nation in the 1920s, and yet it was brought to its knees by Hitler. You know something interesting about Germany, both for World War I and World War II. So I'm reading a book by P.T. Forsyth about prayer, but he's writing at the time of World War I. He's an Englishman, and he's writing and saying, how do we pray for our side to have victory over Germany when Germany has been such a powerful force for Christianity for so many years? And I thought, what an interesting observation. But you know what the answer is? The answer, the reason Germany got into the situation they did by the time of the First World War is 50 years before the First World War, Charles Darwin's book was translated into German. And there was a professor in the German schools who went out and promoted it like it was the Bible. And all the educated class in Germany studied Darwin's Origin of the Species. And they came to reject the very simple foundation of the Bible, the biblical chronology, biblical teaching of creationism. So by the time you get to World War I, the educated class in Germany had already abandoned, they were still going to church maybe, because that was from their parents' generation. So the great foundation of godly theologians in Germany leading up to that point was all thrown under the bus. And it was overturned because of an acceptance of Darwinian evolution being promoted in the German universities. Ideas have consequences, and the erosion doesn't happen from one day to the next. It's gradual. And we are right now going through the very same process in America. Is it too late? We've spent too many years thinking that because we have Republicans in office or the stock market is doing really well, that everything's okay. And that's why they've gained so much ground, is because as long as it doesn't pinch me in my personal living, we think everything's okay. Pay attention. The destruction is going on, even with Donald Trump as the president. Even though we may have some policies going the way we think is good, stand by, the destruction continues. And it's happening at grassroots levels, and it's happening at the grassroots levels of our children and grandchildren. And so now what must be done?
If people are looking for something to do, we have our work cut out for us.
I believe one of the things that we can do that will have a profound impact in changing America is praying.
As soon as we get off our knees, we need to get on our feet.
Become educated about what's going on in the country.
Spend time reading.
Understand their philosophy and their goals.
They have to master this documentary. They have to go over it a dozen times.
It might be having a monthly movie night with family and friends, watching one of the many great documentaries out there about what is going on in our country.
One of the things that I think people in the United States who believe in our country, believe in our values, can do, quite frankly, is stand up for those values, to make their views known.
And there's times that you got to speak up, and you've got to call things what they are.
We need to be willing to be criticized and to not be silent because of the criticism.
It was Martin Luther who said, if we're faithful on all battlefronts besides, it's precisely where the battle's the hottest, then we're traitors to the cause.
I like the quote by Abraham Lincoln, who said that silence makes cowards out of the best of men. And we got a lot of people that need to be speaking up right now.
We have an obligation to speak the truth, about the policies that are taking us 180 degrees from God's will.
Expand within your church. Expand within the people you have contact. Bring them up to speed and knowledge on what's going on.
We need to organize those around us. By simply mobilizing the unique groups of people we are in contact with and being their source of information, we can have an extraordinary effect.
Lenin said that the organized minority will beat the disorganized majority every time.
Why should we be buying products from companies that are going to fund organizations that attack our values?
They need to be really smart in using the mass media. They might want to blog.
Using the power of YouTube and that sort of thing to educate as many people as possible. A good YouTube video can reach millions of people. And if Susan Boyle can do it, why can't we?
If you do the right kinds of things on YouTube that are creative and do them frequently, you can drive a message through society, influencing millions at almost no cost.
We need to be the people who graciously but consistently make contact.
And express to those folks we elected what we want them to do, and what we believe in, what we think is right. And if they don't follow those things, then we need to make efforts to get them out and get other people in that will.
Pick the good ones and stick to them. Don't waste your time on people who won't stand up for their country.
All the others are making contact. The people who really want to honor America need to make contact.
We also need to be influencing our own families. We've got to teach our own children and grandchildren the difference between truth and error, why they believe the things they do, and the true source of America's greatness.
If what we're talking about is true, the most important thing we can do is protect our young, because that is where all of this is leading. They need to get that younger generation under their belt.
And more parents are going to have to say, they're just going to have to sacrifice and take responsibility for their kids' education, because that's really where it starts, to impart that belief. The Southern Baptists, we're seeing that 85% of their kids, after they get out of their home, are essentially rejecting their faith, rejecting what they were taught. And of course, I think the reason for that is because their parents didn't have a lot of influence over them.
I believe the public schools are the greatest cultural influence in this country.
You homeschool your kids or get them in a Christian day school.
If there is any way at all, homeschool your children. Homeschoolers out-test everybody.
Our children need to be taught from Scripture a properly biblical worldview.
That requires time. It requires effort. It requires purpose.
Our minds should be the sharpest minds in the world.
We need to work within our family to educate our children on what kind of country they live in and build their faith, and then get involved.
The left has been working for decades to push us away from God and His laws, and we need to be willing to sacrifice whatever it takes to turn our country back to Him. Throughout our history as Americans, though, there has always been a great price to be paid for preserving, protecting, and defending this great land.
The people who built America paid a great price. The people who went to war for our nation, boy, did they pay a price. And one of the American values was, we will pay a price for what is right. We will give of ourselves, even if it requires the giving of our lives. That was an American value. That's why it is such a heroic and honorable thing when a soldier defending us pays that price. That's like when you go to Arlington Cemetery in Washington, or the Tomb of the Unknown. You stand there and you say, this is America. We were the people who so believed in these values that it's an honor to stand for, even if it can cost you your very life.
One thing I think we do need to remember, though, is that as we look at those we consider to be heroes in the past, they weren't people who just went along with the status quo. They weren't people who were just saying what was accepted at that time in history. They were people who were rising up above the evil that was being committed in their culture at that time. That's why they were heroes, because they weren't like everyone else.
Never, ever lose sight of the power of one individual American. They can have an unbelievable magnifying effect just by the very fact they make up their mind to do so.
The hope is in this, as Francis Schaeffer said, that as the dull ache of the human soul can no longer be filled with material prosperity, people are going to turn to spiritualism. Will it be pagan spirituality or biblical Christianity? We know, according to the Denver Post, June of 2008, pagan spirituality is doubling in America every 18 months. So we better get out there, because I'll tell you, pagan spirituality and Christianity will both get you to God, but one will get you there as your judge, as your Savior.
If we humble ourselves, we fall to our knees, if we seek His face, we pray, and we turn from our wicked ways, then we have a chance for God to hear from heaven, to forgive our sins, and heal our land.
And if we are being judged, then we need to use this as an opportunity to show people that this judgment in this life is nothing compared to the judgment that's to come, that's eternal, and really make them understand the importance of fleeing God's wrath by accepting Him, repenting of their sins through faith and repentance.
I believe that's the only chance, the only hope we have as a nation. Hope is not found in rhetoric. Hope is found in God, the God of creation. And you know what? Our founders were in covenant with that God.
You need a dedicated, informed, praying Christian making things happen and being determined to do so.
Time has only allowed me to present a fraction of what I found. The reason I called this film Agenda is because I wanted to make a clear distinction between what I was researching and all the conspiracy theories out there. The dictionary says a conspiracy is an evil plan formulated in secret by two or more persons, but an agenda is simply a list of things to be done. At every turn of my investigation, I found agendas by people and groups of the left outlining their plan in their own words. They've been doing most of this right out in the open. Some of you might be thinking, these Marxist ideas aren't the most serious threat we face. What about militant Islam, our open borders, the national debt, or even China? Well, I agree. America is facing so many serious threats right now. But the reason I believe this is the most dire is because it's destroying us on the inside. Through the political correctness and dumbing down, it's causing us to lose our ability to call evil evil and stand against it. I fear for our country. If we go along business as usual, not informed, not aware of what's going on, then the very small minority that have a plan and are great at organizing the uninformed and misguided will make sure their plan is carried out. I hope you realize it won't just be your children and grandchildren that pay the horrific price of living in the society they're trying to create. No, it will be far worse than that.
Every time a civilization goes down or a country goes down militarily or economically, somebody else fills the gap. Now, if you look around the world now, it's going to be China, which is massively arming. You've got Russia, which is becoming increasingly belligerent. You've got the radical Islamic world, which works hand in glove with the Russians and the Chinese all the time. You've got a virtually red Latin America. You've got a neutral socialist Europe. So America hasn't got a lot of friends left in the world. Now, that's just not going to affect America. That's going to affect every single remaining country in the free world. Who's going to stand up to China if America doesn't? Who's going to stand up to the Russians? Is Europe going to do it? Australia, New Zealand, Canada? Not a chance. If America, and this is the point I think Americans need to comprehend, if America goes down economically, it will go down militarily. If America goes down militarily, we all go down. The free world is finished, and it'll be finished for a very, very long time.
Pretty sobering, huh? Okay. What must be done? First, pray. First thing that has to be done is to pray. This is why the solution starts in churches. Starts with Christians. Starts with God's people. And if God's people are asleep, may God help us. Right? So this is why the socialist agenda in America has been to infiltrate the churches. And if we can persuade if they, I should say, can persuade churches to emphasize amazing worship services with light shows and smoke and chairs that vibrate and sound that vibrates your head and entertainment based, if they can persuade churches to do that, who's going to want to pray when you can go do that? Feel good churches that make you feel good. And the end result is prayer gets thrown out. Now, when you think about what Jesus taught about prayer and the kind of prayer that he said was important, what kind of prayer was it? Was it Hail Mary prayers? Prayer of faith. It's the fervent prayer. It's the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man. And the kind of prayer that he evidenced and that Jesus talked about, or that he demonstrated, was like the Syrophoenician woman, when he goes specifically to her region, completely away from Judaism, and she comes and says, Lord, heal my daughter, who's demon-possessed, and he didn't pay any attention. She had to persist, until finally he turned and said, woman, you have great faith, and your prayer is answered. And so he demonstrated it, he taught it in Luke 11 and Luke 18, that we need to have that kind of prayer, but that kind of prayer is not going to exist in a church that lives for entertainment. It just doesn't work. So, until we have churches that are back to praying as a priority, America's doomed. And by the way, not just America. Freedom in the world for decades to come, if these people are right, and I believe they are. Praying is first. Then, what's next? Become what? Educated. Spend time. Understand their philosophy and their goals, because once we understand their goals, we can see that they're fulfilling them. And we should know then where we have to stand strong and fight. All right? So one thing I think people in the United States who believe in our country, believe in our values, can do, quite frankly, is stand up and speak up. There's times that you've got to speak up. Right? Stand up and speak up. And Lenin said the organized minority will defeat the disorganized majority every time. Okay? And of course, the next page, we also need to be influencing our own families. Now, the next paragraph, more and more parents are going to have to say, they're just going to have to sacrifice and take responsibility for their kids' education, because that's really where it starts, to impart that belief. The Southern Baptists, we're seeing that 85% of their kids, after they get out of their home, are essentially rejecting their faith. 85%! That should just shock us. Probably most, or a very large number of them. And the question I have is, what about in our churches? And sadly, the answer is it's about the same. And the reason I know that is because our churches are producing practically no one for the ministry, or being missionaries or pastors. We're just... So, yeah, this is what... So, in other words, they have been completely successful in their agenda. And we have got to wake up. It isn't just a question of maintaining our Bible studies and just keep doing what we're doing. We've got to really get on our knees and pray, and then we've got to strive to reach our own families. Down near the bottom of this page 4, one thing I think we need to do to remember, though, is that as we look at those we consider to be heroes in the past, they weren't people who just went along with the status quo. They weren't people who were just saying what was accepted at that time in history. They were people who were rising up above the evil, that was being committed in their culture at that time, and that's why they were heroes. Never ever lose sight of the power of one individual American, and I would say one individual American empowered by God, because that's what we so desperately need. All right? He calls the movie Agenda. Why? Because what they're doing is right out in the open. They're not even trying to hide it. And that's the sad part. This is all available information, and yet sad. Said the reason I believe this is the most dire, that is what they're doing is the most dire problem, is because it's destroying us on the inside through the political correctness and the dumbing down. By the way, the next video in the series, there's one more video in the series, addresses the problem of Islam related to what's going on. And I think you'll find that very interesting. It's just a couple of years old, and it's but quite fascinating. So we'll start that next Sunday. It's causing us to lose our ability to call evil evil and stand up against it. They're certainly winning from the inside. They're tearing down Christian homes from the inside. Okay, so Trevor Loudon from New Zealand says, if America goes down economically, it will go down militarily. If it goes down militarily, we all go down. The free world is finished, and it will be finished for a very, very long time. I just don't think we fully appreciate what that means, but it's big. Yes, Nancy? Yes. We certainly need to begin in our own families, in our own homes, and start winning back our own children and grandchildren, because if we don't do that, we're lost. Hey, Rusty, let's throw that JPEG image up. This was a Fox News, it's a Wall Street Journal poll that Fox News reported on this past week. Values considered very important. So, first of all, the patriotism, the first category. Look at ages 55 to 91. We considered patriotism important. 79% of Americans 55 to 91 years of age considered patriotism really important. Of the age group 39 to 54, only 65% consider patriotism really important. Of Barnabas' age group, it's good to have you, Barnabas, the 18 to 38-year-old age group, only 42%. Do you realize in just a short amount of time they have cut in half the importance of patriotism? Huh? Well, and I agree with you, Alice, but at the same time I look at it and I say, this is on us. This is on us. We've got to realize if our own children have lost the importance of patriotism, it's on us. Okay? Then religion. Age 55 to 91, 67% considered it important. The next age group down, 52% considered important. Look what's happened. It's been more than cut in half. So that the 18 to 38 age group look at religion and say, only less than a third of them feel that religion is important. And sadly, it's true even amongst Christian homes. We have got to get down on our knees and cry out to God. And then, of course, having children is the last part of that equation. And even that has fallen drastically in the importance of having children. Yes, Paul?
I'm reminded that for Israel in the Old Testament, they were warned that when they got into the land and were enjoying all the possessions, that they better be careful not to forget God. And we seem to be headed in that same direction.
Okay. Last observations, comments, criticisms, heckling. Yes, Whit? That's what I'm saying. Next week we start that. Agenda 2. Yeah. Agenda 2, starting next week. It's just kind of a follow-up and continuation. Okay? Any other comments? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is one DVD, and then the next one is the other DVD. I think I still have another one at home that's brand new. So for $15, I'll sell you one. Sorry, I didn't bring it with me. Yeah, capital. No, I just like to pay my bills. I'm not making any money off it, believe me. But you can get it by going to agendamovie.com or something like that. Yeah. So you can get it your own, like I say, I have at least one or two left that I could sell. Okay, any other? Yeah. A link on YouTube? Okay, yeah. Okay? All right. So, 2 Chronicles chapter 7, we often forget that the Lord was the one that came back to Solomon after his prayer, actually several years later. 2 Chronicles 7, verse 12. Then the Lord appeared to Solomon by night and said to him, I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself as a house of sacrifice. When I shut up heaven and there is no rain, or command the locust to devour the land, or send pestilence upon my people, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and heal their land. It really has to do with us. If we are content with things just to keep going the way they're going, then it will. All right. Yes? Yeah, eventually you might not be able to. But it's right, or even know what's going on. Yeah, we got to pay attention. Yeah, and we got to make our voice heard. All right? Okay. Be back in 10 minutes, please. Other people to sit down and be quiet when the lights dim and the video starts. Let's help other people to not keep talking and making lots of noise, because it is a preparation for our worship time.